Hello everyone, John here with a first look at Bayonetta 2 running on Nintendo Switch. And to discuss it, I am joined by Richard Ledbetter.
Hello there.
How's it going today?
Yeah, not too bad. So I'm really interested to see your results on this one because Bayonetta 2, kind of a challenging game for the Wii U, didn't quite hold up.
Yeah, that's actually something, obviously because Nintendo published it, the game's been limited to the Wii U, and it did suffer from a lot of performance issues, as did Platinum's other games in the system. So by bringing this to the Switch, it's kind of their chance to take a second shot at it. Bayonetta 1 has PC versions and all that, but 2, this is our best shot. So we finally got a chance to play it, and the results are interesting. So what do you want to know first?
Well, I guess basic outline of resolution and visual features compared to the original.
So when the game was first announced, I kind of expected that they would aim for a higher resolution, but as it turns out, the Switch version of Bayonetta 2 runs at 720p, just like the Wii U version. Now, there's also no anti-aliasing, but there are some subtle changes to things like shadows and texture filtering. The shadows are still really pixelated, but they're handled a little differently, so they do look better or worse, kind of depending on the scene. Texture filtering and texture quality are also slightly improved on the Switch as well, which is nice. On the more positive side though, when you switch over to the handheld mode, the game does actually retain the same 720p resolution, which is of course the native resolution of the Switch screen, so it winds up looking really sharp in handheld mode, but rather blurry when you're playing it on a TV, I think. It's also worth pointing out that the game does look identical between handheld and docked modes in Bayonetta 2, so much so that I had to double check the shots that I took. The textures, filtering, resolution are all exactly the same.
Okay, well that's good stuff because, fundamentally, if we have an experience that's on par with Wii U in mobile form, then that's fine by me. And if it's better when docked, which inevitably surely it must be, then happy days. But yeah, I guess initial impressions do suggest that there hasn't been a huge amount of work done to the actual visual makeup of the game.
Yeah, that's right, and when I do the full analysis video, I'll be sure to look extra close to see if they've maybe pushed back some LODs or some of the more subtle things, but on the surface of it, we're looking at the same resolution, same image quality flaws, which of course leads us to performance. And I've sent you a clip over there to take a look at what I've found thus far, and I think the results are kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the issue with the Wii U version was that it targeted 60 frames per second, but could often drop beneath. And well, based on first impressions, it certainly looks as though we are getting a performance uplift here.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The demanding scenes do still suffer from slowdown on the Switch, and especially things like the intro, and I've only had a chance to play through the first few chapters here, so that's kind of what we're limited to. But for now, it's all the same difficult scenes on Wii U are also difficult on Switch, but are usually about, 10 to 20 frames per second higher on average. You know what I mean? Because it's back on the Wii U, we were dropping down to 40 frames per second for extended periods of time, and even these empty areas, there's this area here where you first end up in the square with all the water that we're looking at in the video, and on Wii U, it just tanks even though there's nothing going on. Whereas on Switch, there's still minor issues, but overall, it's much, much faster, especially running in docked mode here. Though if we switch over to portable mode here, you can also see that, it's still kind of struggling. So, kind of the average performance I'm seeing here is docked Switch runs a lot faster overall. Portable mode kind of falls in between the Wii U and the Switch, and Wii U is kind of a lot worse than I remembered, to be honest. It's really not that smooth.
Yeah, I think that was the issue at the time, is that, it was a game that targeted 60 frames per second, but there was that kind of variation. The variance in it was just too much to kind of really feel good. And I think, fundamentally, if we're getting a decent upgrade here, personally, I'm really surprised and happy that we're actually getting a bump in both modes. So the idea that the portable version of Bayonetta 2 is, smoother, if not to a game-changing degree, but definitely smoother than the Wii U original, that's only good news.
Yeah, absolutely, and it kind of makes me wonder what kind of performance we'd see if they bumped it up to 900p or something docked. But what we both saw in this footage is that it's mostly the alpha transparency effects that are kind of killing the performance. So I feel any additional resolution would just make those attacks feel even worse, so it's probably better that they stuck with 720 for now.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I mean, if you look at some of the frame time spikes on there, not exactly pretty. It would be a lot worse with a higher resolution there. So on the one hand, not perfect, but on the other hand, it's definitely a big improvement. And yeah, I think, if you look at the Tegra processor setup, one of its weaknesses is a kind of lack of bandwidth. And it has to share that bandwidth with the CPU as well. So yeah, it's kind of not surprising that we're seeing these dips there.
Yeah, so, it's kind of hitting the weak points of the Switch there. But another thing I want to check, and I haven't really investigated it yet, so on the Wii U, both Bayonetta 1 and 2 kind of have a little bit of extra input latency compared to the 360 version. And I'm curious to try to pick them up and compare the two to see if we've got any improvements. I suspect what people were experiencing there has to do more with the fact that the 360 version of Bayonetta runs with an adaptive VSync, so that's always going to run a little bit faster. And as you can see from the video here, there is no screen tearing on Switch, which is certainly nice. But the main takeaway here is that the game thus far, even in these early stages, it does play awesome on the Switch. I mean, it's still Bayonetta 2, and the extra performance that you get out of this new system is definitely noticeable. I mean, I was surprised to see a little bit of slowdown at the beginning, but then when you refresh your memory on the Wii U, it's like, oh yeah, okay, this is significantly better. So in that sense, it does kind of feel like we finally have a definitive release of Bayonetta 2. And I haven't had the chance to load up the first game yet, but I suspect based on what we saw on Wii U with Bayonetta 1, that it too should offer significantly better to nearly locked 60 frames per second performance, as that game always ran faster than the sequel.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. I mean, going back to the input lag thing, Xbox 360 definitely would have been double buffered. I mean, you see that in the tearing. Triple buffering possibly on the Wii U and possibly even the Switch, because we do have no tearing whatsoever. So that is a possibility there. But I guess this is something we'll need to look at when we take a deeper look at the game.
So yeah, I guess that's kind of the long and short of it. We're looking at a higher frame rate, the same image quality, and not a whole lot else. And I guess, if there's been any additional improvements made, I'll have to find out when I look a little deeper at the Wii U version side by side. But it should also be noted that, as with the original release, all of the game's cutscenes are still rendered at 30 frames per second. And thankfully, they do have correct frame pacing, so they look nice and smooth, and, great use of motion blur, and the cutscenes still look great, especially in handheld mode, I have to say. They're very, very sharp, and they look excellent. So I kind of feel like that's where the game is best played right now, even though the frame rate isn't quite as good as I'd like. I mean, in handheld, it definitely is not as good as the docked mode, but the fact that it's faster than Wii U, even in handheld mode, and it looks so sharp on that little screen, it's a really cool thing to be able to hold this game in your hand, I have to say.
I mean, I really like the idea of just being able to take the classics from the Wii U and play them on the go with no impact to performance. In fact, enhanced performance compared to the originals. It's just, a bit of a win-win for me. So yeah, while we may not be getting a massive revamp, a remaster, it's still, more than enough for me, I think.
Yeah, and that's been interesting seeing all these games return on the Switch from the Wii U, because, I mean, I do have a decent-sized Wii U collection, but if you look at the sales numbers, obviously, the U didn't exactly do that well, so there's a lot of people out there that missed out on a lot of great Nintendo or third-party games like this, and it's awesome that now it is possible to bring it to a much larger audience and see improvements like this. But I think that's really about all there is for now. This is just our surface-level, first-look kind of conversation at the game, but I think you have an idea of how the game is shaping up on the Switch. And I will be back in a week or so with more coverage of the game, and we'll be taking a look in more depth at Bayonetta 2, and of course take a look at Bayonetta 1 and see how it stacks up against all the different versions. So look forward to that. Thanks for joining me today, Rich.
Yeah, no problem.
And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe as always. Follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John and Rich signing off.